In the reigns of Mehmed II, Salim the Grim, and Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman Empire reached its zenith as a political power and in moral prestige. Under them, Turkey became the greatest single power in Europe and the Middle East. The policy of facing west and learning from Christian subjects had borne fruits. But from this onwards, there was a period of stability and then a slow decline. The events which followed the death of Sultan Suleiman in 1566 were the beginning of the slow decline of the Ottoman Empire. Weak and incompetent sultans like Salim II, Murad III, Ibrahim and Mohammed IV respectively came to the throne and done their part to weaken the empire. In 1683, the Turks' final attempt to capture Vienna resulted in their first really serious defeat and marked the beginning of their long retreat from Europe altogether. Nevertheless, the process was a slow one because though the Turks might be inferior to Europe now in material things, they still had mastery and long experience of the government and art of international diplomacy. But there now appeared on the horizon of Eastern Europe a new power which was destined to have profound effect upon the fortune of Ottoman Empire and to further its decline. The Eastern Slavs began now to form the centralized state of Great Russia and to press towards the Black Sea. The Ottoman power began to feel the change of this new Slav state that are growing in the north by the middle of the 18th century. Like the Ottomans, the Slav state had also suffered greatly from the invasions of the Mongols, yet they recovered rapidly once she got liberated. Between 1672 and 1914, there were 12 Russo-Turkish wars. As a result of these wars, the Ottomans were pushed southwards and northern outposts of the Ottoman Empire were occupied by the Russians. The Russians accomplished this only after heavy losses had been inflicted upon them. As a result of continuous defeats at the hands of Eastern Europe and of Russia, the Turks began to realize that medieval society was passing and that if the Ottoman Empire didn't wake, it would sooner or later break up. It may be said that 1774 was the date of the first real impact of the Europe on Turkey. In that year, Turkey suffered a disastrous defeat at the hands of Catherine of Russia and had to sign humiliating Peace of Kenarji. It was clear that if Turkey didn't reform, first her army, then her system of government, and at last the end of the empire would not be far off. So, in 1774, Abdul Hamid first managed to secure European experts and artisans to teach new methods in his army. He encouraged his own son Salim III to take up reforms and gave him considerable freedom of activity. It was the time of French Revolution, and this great event had an influence on his thinking as well. Thus, he was the first man in Turkish history to advocate the equality of the sexes. The Ottomans were struggling to bring reforms to the empire, yet the Russians didn't let them get going. A series of Russo-Turkish wars started. Eighth Turkish War with Russia broke out in 1806, and it was possible to argue that the reforms must wait the return of the peace, because Alexander I of Russia had marched his armies into Bessarabia and claimed a protectorate over the Danubian Christians. Under the clause 7 of the Treaty of Kenarji, Russia had acquired the right to protect the Orthodox Church throughout the empire. This gave her the pretext to intervene in its internal affairs, since religious rights could easily acquire political significance. The treaty that ended the next Russo-Turkish War of 1806 went a step further and gave Russia political rights in respect of the Christians of one part of the empire, named the Danubian provinces. All this had important consequences inside Turkey and helped to postpone reforms. The year after the war, In 1807, Sultan Salim III tried to start reforms by enrolling the younger Janissary recruits into the regular army. But the older Janissaries, who were the beneficiaries of the old corrupt regime, suddenly revolted and murdered the Sultan. However, in resulting confusion, during which was a short reign of Mustafa IV, Mahmud was placed on the throne. Mahmud II was an able sultan and had every intention of subduing the Janissaries, because he knew that unless this was done, all reforms were impossible. However, he went about his task with caution. His danger lay not only with the Janissaries, but also at this time with the Greeks, who, through their patriarch, were now actually aiming to get control of Constantinople. When the Greek War of 1821 broke out, Mahmud used the Janissaries to massacre the Greeks and subdue the rebellion. Having done this, he turned on the Janissaries. He was assisted by a group of young army officers who enabled him at last to overcome chief center of the opposition, the Agas of Janissaries. Officers of the regular army outside the Janissaries were in general favorable to reforms, because many had studied in Europe and others had read about the Western ideas. So in 1826, a contingent of Turkish regular troops marched from Adrianople to Constantinople and arrested the Janissary leaders. The ulama, meanwhile, declared itself on the side of the Sultan. The religious chiefs at this time supported reforms and suppression of the Janissaries, who were still suspected of favoring Christians. This was the end of the Janissaries that ended in a massacre and breakup of a whole military organization. Thus was removed one of the barriers to progress in the shape of Praetorian Guard, which, however, much it had served its purpose in the reigns of former sultans, had now become a menace to the progress. Mahmud II didn't actually complete much in way of concrete measures, but he laid the foundation of what later became Tanzimat reforms. The Russo-Turkish War of 1806 had created difficulties for the reforms, though it had caused the crisis that had led to the dissolution of the Janissaries. But it has resulted in Russia gaining Bessarabia and a protectorate over the Danubian. The second quarter of the 19th century, moreover, renewed the Russian danger. Tsar Nicholas of Russia, who succeeded Alexander I, was bent on exploiting all the opportunities afforded by his father's acquisition of protectorate rights over the Danubian Christians. He sought to extend these rights over the Christians of the whole Ottoman Empire. Feeling secured in his position as an aristocrat of Russia and having ruthlessly suppressed the Decembrist attempts of mild reforms at home, he saw his opportunity to unite the country in a foreign war. He was convinced that the Ottoman Empire was tottering to its doom, and he determined not to allow those efforts to reform to succeed in Turkey, which he had so effectively suppressed in his own country. For this and other reasons, he went in 1828 to war with the Sultan, whose army was just then in the process of reorganization and re-equipment. By force of numbers, the Russians pressed the Turks across the Balkan mountains and penetrated to the gates of Constantinople. But the inability to hold large areas of European Turkey, with the Russian economy strained to the utmost, and the hostility of Western powers to Russia's advance in East, forced the Tsar to withdraw his army back across the Danube and content himself with naval bases the right to keep warships in the Black Sea. Further, foreign complications made Sultan Mahmud II's reforms still more difficult to get going. First, there was a Greek revolt of 1821, then the Turkish defeat at the naval battle of Navarino in 1827, and finally the revolt of Muhammad Ali in 1831, who was the Sultan's viceroy of Egypt. Greek independence was obtained in 1828, and this ended a constant drain on Turkish resources. But the revolt of Muhammad Ali resulted in the invasion first of Syria, then in 1832 of large parts of Anatolia. Mahmud II was now facing much difficult situations, and in 1833 he actually signed the Treaty of Unkiar Eskelis with Russia. This nominally put him under the protection of Turkey's arch enemy. Tsar Nicholas secured this treaty on seeing the Sultan's desperate state and fearing to exasperate the Western powers by opening the questions of partition of Turkey. And this treaty gave him the control of Dardanelles and the exclusion of warships of other powers from the area. But the reaction of the Great Britain and France to this was so violent that the Tsar never dared to apply the treaty, which in time became a dead letter. Finally, Syria revolted against Muhammad Ali and his son Ibrahim, and the whole movement against the Sultan collapsed in 1841. Thus, Turkey survived a most critical period. In the consequence of these wars, the reforms of Mahmud advanced slowly, and he died in 1839.